Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. That was a very nice introduction. I'm really happy to be here. To be clear, I work for the Ministry of Digital Affairs of Poland, so I hope that's going to be something interesting. And to clear the way to what's actually the elephant in the room, which is the AI Act. You probably build products for Europeans, you probably make businesses that has impact in Europe. And as a tech person, because I want to make it clear, I'm not a lawyer, sadly, I want to make it clear how we can look at the AI Act as tech people, as business people, to very quickly make it a bit easier for us. So it's not for dummies, it's more for AI Act for techies. So I'm happy to lead you through this journey very quickly. So AI Act is a great new regulation that has came into force on the 1st August 2024, and it has 125 pages, which is very short when you think that the draft actually had around 500. So, you know, if you can't sleep, you can always read it, but maybe it's easier to look into what actually is there. So the most important part of the AI Act, which of course is a European regulation regulating artificial intelligence, is that it is based on the risk assessment. So you're not looking into technology. So is neural network cool or is decision tree cool? No, you're saying, what is the use case that I'm using this technology for? And based off this use case, you're trying to say what obligations do you have to fit in, or what do you have to do with your solution for it to be working with the current regulation, to be aligned with the regulation. So as you can see, there's the unacceptable risk, high risk, there's limited risk and minimal risk. And there's one extra benefit that we got, which is actually regulating technology. So we have the risk approach, and there's one other extra thing, which is general purpose AI, that actually regulates technology. So it's not as easy as it seems, but I will say a couple words about that later. The most important thing, it's risk-based approach. So you look at your use case, what are you using the AI for, and then you assess what risk category does it fit in. So the first one is the unacceptable risk. So it's easy to say that these are the systems that are not going to be permitted to be used in the European Union generally, because of course the regulation is for the whole digital market of the EU. And these systems are related to manipulation and exploiting of vulnerabilities. And for example, we can say, let's say your grandma has a new application that says it's a wallet and it helps you deal with your finances, but it actually exploits her age as her vulnerability and tells her to take a loan that, you know, she wouldn't have taken otherwise if not for this application that is her assistant. Another thing is, of course, that the systems that are not accepted are the systems that infer emotions in workplace or educational institutions. So, for example, how good, it was already mentioned today, do I focus? Does it mean I'm a good employee or I'm a bad employee? Should I get a raise? Should I not get a raise? Also social scoring, so a very general idea of the Black Mirror episode that we must all have seen, it's also not acceptable. And second thing are the high-risk systems, which are the systems that basically are, you know, second, so they're acceptable and you can actually have them, but there's the most things that you have to do to comply with the regulation. And these systems, first of all, medical devices, any devices is called harmonization regulation, so anything that has to do with a product that has an AI safety component, or elevators, bicycles, toys, these are the sort of things that you can think about that has AI components. Second of all, anything that is related to health, safety, rights, or environment. So if anything that you do can have implications on, do I get a bed in a hospital or not? Or do I get protection or not for whatever reason? These are the things that will fall into the high-risk category. Also hiring. Do I hire someone because, you know, they did this or that, they looked away during the interview and the AI says, you know, they weren't so focused and maybe we shouldn't hire them. These are also high-risk systems. And what I want to stress is that the majority of obligations fall on providers and developers of these systems. So it's also important to say, who am I? I'll talk about this. Who am I in this chain of producing of the AI system? Am I using the system? Am I just building the system? If I'm building the system, then the most of the obligations will fall on me. And you might say, oh no, so obligations, there's a lot of stuff that I have to do. But the obligations that are there, even for the high-risk systems, are very straightforward, which is you need to have technical documentation. You need to manage the risk of the system, so the life cycle of the risk management. Your model needs to be transparent. You need to say why the decision was made, right? So then, of course, if someone says, do I get a bed in hospital or not, you're most probably to use linear regression because it's easier to say why the model made that decision and not different than LLM. Because if, ChatGPT that has been mentioned tells me, don't give them the bed in the hospital, and then you're like, what data was this model trained on? Data governance, another thing. So if you're a technical person and you think MLOps literally solve most of the issues and problems that you can find in the obligations for the high-risk systems. So it's not as demonic as it can seem. A smaller section is limited risk, so that's the third thing in the category, which is basically everything that is generated, right? So if I see a post that is generated, I need to say that the content has been generated by an AI. I cannot say, well, it's been created by a person if it's been generated. Of course, there are many ifs and what ifs in case of like, what if it was code-generated? What if it was generated but changed? There are many discussions here, but let's say, simple case, generated by AI, picture, text. And if you have a bot on your website, which is a very familiar and often used use case of like a bot or voice bot that is talking to you, your customers, and is saying, oh, I'm your digital assistant. It has to say, I'm a digital assistant. It has a label that is digital. You cannot pretend that it's actually a human. And another thing that I also wanted to touch on, there's nothing here about copyright. So if you have questions, so if I generate something, what happens with the copyright? This regulation doesn't touch on it. So it's just important to know that. And a last category, which is the minimal risk, which is generally everything else, the big sack of everything else. That's basically what you have to do is you have to make sure that people that handle the system know that it's AI, right? So it's not like that's one of the things that is important for all the AI systems, so that people that handle it has an idea that it's an AI system and sort of know how to deal with that system, right? And most of the use cases that you can think about are actually going to be the minimal risk category. So it's not that everything is regulated and everything is scary, because a lot of the things are just going to be the minimal risk category. And this was a beautiful regulation. It was beautifully written. It was technology agnostic. But then we had this change of, I think it is the most used word of this conference so far, ChatGPT. I'm going to add +1 to this word count. Literally made it harder, because how can I say that the use case only matters if the built model is itself built on bad data, broken, biased? How can I say about use cases? There's this big question coming in, right? Do we only regulate use cases? Then what happens with creators of technology who make this technology biased from the first place? And then I, the user, the company who's using it, will be responsible for this model being biased, right? So the negotiations moved into one piece of actually regulating technology. So the only part if you're creating a model, it actually matters. So the technology matters is this GPI general purpose AI. So in this case, so these are the foundation models, and the generative models are also part of this bubble. And in here, you must provide technical documentation, you must provide instruction for use of these models. It's interesting, and I think it's a very good move by the EU, and I'm a very fan of open source, which is they're lessening the burden on open source. So if you have the open source model, there's less that you actually have to do than if it's not open source, which kind of makes sense. And open source doesn't mean open data, so it kind of makes sense, but if you have an open source model, you also have to cite your sources, which is interesting in the case of the lawsuit that we have been seeing for a long time, right? The New York Times and OpenAI/Microsoft. Okay, panic mode, everybody's in panic. What do we do? What do I do? I don't know. And I just want to say a couple of things to calm you down and say that, first of all, the obligations are not that hard. Most of the systems are on the minimal risk, but also if you use your model, if you do anything connected to AI, which I assume you do because you're here, A regulation actually comes into force into a couple of timelines. So first of all, the forbidden, the unacceptable risk will actually come into force, so it will be enforced since 2nd February 2025. So that's the date when the unacceptable risk systems will be unacceptable and you cannot have them on the market. So these are the things that you have to have in your mind first. Second, the GPI, right? So the general purpose AI, it's 12 months, so it's 2nd August 2025. Then everything else, the whole act comes into force 2 years later. So it's 2nd August 2026. Again, the act doesn't apply to R&D. So if you're just, building a startup, it's not on the market yet, you're playing in your basement with your startup idea, no one's going to come to your house and say, where's the technical documentation? It's good to have it in your process. That's what MLOps is for, because you're actually going to have easy time going to the market and putting things on the market, but you don't have to do it when it's just an R&D. What do we do? What we do is, if you create, build, have anything to do with any AI systems, try to write them down. Write them down what you have. What is your role in the system? Do you use something that is already put into the market, right? Is it just I take the GPT model and then I put it into a chatbot on my website? So then the GPI model is not mine. So I'm not responsible for the model. I'm responsible for telling the user that it's talking to an AI. Limited risk use case, right? So just write down what you have and kind of say, who am I as a company, as someone putting things into the market in this AI model? And then where does it fall into the risk category? For all these things that I said, limited risk, high risk, there is a nice list, and I'm going to show you which is the best source for this information, because European Union really stepped up this time and did a very nice website, which was co-created with AI, by the way. So just see who you are in here. And then identify the requirements. The requirements are also written down. It's, as I said, cybersecurity, robustness of the model, transparency, all those things are also written down in an easy way. And give yourself time. There's no need to panic like the Muppet on a previous meme, because we have time. This is not the longest time that we can have, but there is time, and we need to just basically give yourself time for information from the Commission as well, because the Commission is actually doing their job to recommend to us what system are what are the exclusions, because there are also going to be things excluded. For example, the forbidden systems or the unacceptable risk category, there are going to be exclusions that are connected to, for example, maybe something is saving lives and it's very important. This is still happening, and there's a way that we can, talk to the Commission, tag them on LinkedIn and say, this is important. It's a process. The regulation is there, we cannot change it, but there are still things that are being worked through. And as I said, be aware who you are and what the requirements are going to be. Useful materials. As I said, Commission really stepped up to the plate this time and gave us a great website, which is the AI Act Explorer, which is as you can see, the Artificial Intelligence Act.eu. And basically, first of all, it just gives you the whole act, but then it also shows you what things are. So there's a definition of that, there's a definition of this, and then it has a whole timeline posted. It has a lot of FAQs, useful information. So that's the place where the most information can be found. Second of all, there's a very cool institute in Germany, which is called Apply AI Institute, which is providing us and making cool visuals and cool, basically, dashboards also for tech people, because they have tech people involved in this process. Who I am, where do I do? You have this nice little instruction. Question, right or left? Question, right or left? And then you can sort of navigate this through. And another thing, they recently created a risk database, so risk classification. They are saying, let's say you have a project, Operation AI for traffic, and they say, we think it's going to be high risk, or we think it's going to be limited risk. Of course, it's just a recommendation, but it's also good when you're trying to see which one, who am I, and what is going on. And I really think this is fine. And I really think it's going to get easier with time, but I just want to say that we're doing everything we can, also, here working with the Commission, and I'm sure that, I hope that the next workshop, and I'm sure of that, will be great to show you how to actually apply this to action. But the important part is, if there is anything I can help or any questions that you have, oh, no, the slides are there. Okay, I'm happy to answer, and I'm just really saying that we have great lawyers. Lawyers are really a thing, and you as tech people just are aware. We're aware, and it's a good way going forward. Thank you so much.